Braveheart Workshops, inspiring connection. Restore. Dream. Getaway Experiences. Love, live, and laugh. With Braveheart Workshops. Live now with Jill Reynolds.
The Connection Show. Restore, renew, and reconnecting community. Sponsored by Braveheart Workshops, live with Jill Reynolds. And joining me today is Danielle McMahon. Welcome, Danielle, to the show. How are you today?
I'm excellent. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's such a privilege to have you. Where are you located so the audience know where you're sitting today?
I'm in Portland, Michigan, which is a very small town. And in Michigan, we're like, it's here.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'd love the audience to know a little bit about you, so I'm going to read your bio to them. Facing challenges, Danielle McMahon learned how to not only survive, but thrive. She shares her journey through an empowering message of resilience, inspiring you to emerge a better version of yourself. Danielle has pressed through many challenges to personal peace in her life. Having earned a Bachelor of Science degree with a minor in women's studies, she chose to become a farrier, subsequently surviving an abusive relationship, drug addiction, and relocating to begin anew. Not overnight, but over time, she accomplished this and met her husband. They now own a horse farm, taking on boarders and training horses together. Danielle became certified as a riding instructor and a horse whisperer. Critically injured in 2008 while shoeing a horse, she began pressing through again to find her gift, to inspire others to find their personal peace. When you meet Danielle, you will quickly discover steel beneath the quiet, calm exterior. Life's experiences refined her to where she is today, a diamond shining where coal used to be. Let her teach you, using a personal development technique, a basic personality assessment, and horse whispering. This unique perspective on attaining and maintaining personal peace is valuable no matter your age or your profession. Well, what a wonderful bio, Danielle. And I'm so grateful. And I see your horse in the background. What a beautiful privilege to the audience that you get to share a bit about yourself.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, what I'd love the audience to know, if we could do this, let's take you back down memory lane on your journey growing up in your house of origin, and a little bit about your story back as a child that led you down some of those painful experiences in your life, like drug addiction and things of that. So take us back a little bit and tell us how it evolved over the years.
Okay, I'll try to do it quickly. I suspect that my first memory around my home of origin was a great big brick house in Paris, Illinois. I have three older sisters, and my dad was teaching junior high school, and my mom might have been working as a secretary. I'm not for sure. At some point, she worked as a secretary, and they offered to teach them, train them to become computer programmers. So she was excited about that, and she took them up on that. So she learned programming very early in the whole computer thing. So she was doing one or the other of those things, I think. So I was about, I don't know, 3, 4, 5. We moved when I was 6 to an even smaller town in Illinois. And we lived in the parsonage there, and my dad was a minister at that church. And that's like my favorite year of my young childhood. And I do tell that story in my chapter in the book that we're in together. And
what town was that in? What town was that in Illinois?
That was New Providence.
Okay.
the name of it was New Providence. And at the end of that year was the first time I was ever put on a horse. And that is an exquisite experience for me. And I fall in love with horses and spend the rest of my life pursuing that, right? So I didn't know for a long time. We moved the next year to upstate New York. So then I lived in Auburn, New York for several years. And my parents got jobs at a community college there. So mom was in the computer programming and dad was an assistant professor of English there at the Auburn Community College. So we lived there until I was 13, and my parents got divorced when I was 11.
Mm.
And then I moved to a nearby village with my dad when my mom moved away to Washington, D.C. to complete her education. So at 14, I went to boarding school. At 15, I moved with my mom to Kentucky, where she started medical school. So she was a medical student when I was a high school student. And all of this, believe it or not, is in my chapter. I probably should have told one story, but this is the big story that wanted to be told, right? All the things that added up to who I became at that point. And it took until I was 30, until I started to be able to look back over my family of origin and say, oh, that's what happened. And it took getting clean and seeking help and getting help, because before that, I think I'd sought help in the wrong places. So I
So,
didn't get it. And
so
it
a
just
lot.
added to my victim mentality.
So along that journey then of moving, relocating, new friends, abandonment issues, parents divorcing, one moving away, coming back. At what age then did you begin to get involved with drugs? And I'm assuming drugs and alcohol or drug of choice. What was your drug of choice, and at what age did that kind of come into fruition?
Well, I started using drugs when I was probably 16. And I functionally used drugs until I was 28, 29. And then, so, you have to have gratitude for things that don't seem to be good things in your life. So I would express my gratitude to crack cocaine
Hmm.
for making me into a true addict and for getting me to admit that that was a problem in my life and I needed to do something differently.
Well, that's kind of funny because
So that was,
I'm also a recovered crack cocaine addict, and I got recovered at 28 years old. And I remember several years after I recovered from my addiction, um, seeing TV shows about crack cocaine. And I remember Danielle, it had been it had been at least 5 years since I used, and I remember seeing like addicted to crack cocaine, and I remember saying, "Oh, Father God, I'm so grateful I didn't get into crack." And then all of a sudden, I'm listening, and I'm like, "Wait a minute, we used to freebase." And I was addicted to freebasing, and I'm like looking back and going, I think it's the same as crack cocaine. I think they just changed the words around
I,
because I'm from the Richard
I
Pryor.
think it is,
Yeah, I'm from the Richard Pryor days, of burning that coke back to its natural
right?
thing and smoking. And I'm like, I think I was a crack cocaine addict because, again, we were doing all this, but again, back in the 70s, we called it freebasing, and then in the 80s, they switched it and called it crack cocaine. So it was kind of funny because I was 100% delivered from it through God and did not realize I was a crack cocaine addict until, like I said, I was like praying, thank you, I wasn't, and then I was like, oh, but I was. And yeah, in my addiction, it was funny. I got to towards the end of using so much so frequently that I became also an alcoholic, but not because I liked alcohol. I became an alcoholic because I loved cocaine so much that I wanted to use more and more and more and more. And so I wouldn't have a heart attack. I would balance it with shots of tequila so that I'd have the downer to go with the upper. And so it wasn't until I
Mhm.
got into recovery at Narcotics Anonymous meetings where their preamble says the only desire for membership is a desire to abstain from all mind and mood altering drugs, including alcohol. That all of a sudden I says, "Oh wait, alcohol's a drug too, and I'm a drug addict, so I better get off
And
of."
broccoli is a vegetable.
Exactly. So I got off of alcohol and started going to AA, and and it's kind of funny because at AA so many of the alcoholics talk about being diehard alcoholics and how they loved it, and I was like, I was an alcoholic but hated alcohol. Just give me my drugs. So we have a lot in common when it comes to that and divorce and things of that. So at 28 years old is when I got clean. Um, so when did you get clean? And how did that come
I was
about?
30.
And how did that come
I
about?
was 30. Part and parcel of my crack cocaine addiction was the abusive relationship that I was in. So it was really getting out of the abusive relationship as well as getting clean. And honestly, I mean, it's all a very difficult path and it's all a very blurry kind of memory of that time because there was so much chaos, right? In that lifestyle. And they say if the drugs don't get you, the lifestyle will. So I figured out a way to get out of that abusive relationship. And the only way that I could figure was to leave when he was asleep.
hmm
And so I did that. And my mom basically rescued me. Like she bought me a plane ticket, I think. So once I got away, I flew to Michigan. I was living in Kentucky at the time, and she made it a condition that I attend 12-step program
Okay.
when I came to stay with her, and that I could not use while I was staying with her. So that got me started. And then there was a period of time where I felt like I had to go tie up things in Kentucky where I was, and I did that and ended up back with my abuser, had to do it all again. And then that was a relapse as well. And then when I got back to Michigan at that point, that's when I start my clean time. So
So
July of that same year.
so from the time you flew to Michigan and got clean and sober and started going to 12-step recovery, and then went back to Kentucky
That was in February.
and then you went back to
That was in February.
mhm. And then
And then that I got back in July.
so February, March, April, May, June, July, about 6 months you were back with him. So at that point, going back to him, on your journey of recovery, Danielle, did it come into fruition for you that your number one drug of choice was codependency and your secondary drug of choice was crack cocaine? Were you able to identify that?
Absolutely. I did say that it's gonna be harder to stay away from him
hmm
than it is to get and stay clean.
hmm
And like I said, it's all very difficult, but that was more difficult for me in many ways once I left the second time. I had already talked to a counselor in Kentucky and said, I want to make sure that I'm not just doing a geographical solution because I know wherever I go, there I am.
hmm
And she said, as long as you continue to do the things you need to do to recover, that's not a geographical solution. That's just getting yourself safe.
Yeah. And I
So
asked you
that's
I
what I
asked you that
did.
about the codependency because I follow along a lot of the same path as you, and I've done 38 years of recovery now with lots of therapy and healing. And And I've recognized with codependency, I had the privilege, and I call it a privilege. I had the privilege, Danielle, in 1992 to do inpatient treatment for a whole month on codependency when insurance companies used to pay coverage for healing of codependency. So I learned a lot about codependency and treatment. And I also came to learn with addictions that in general, it's the lineage of when the addiction started in our childhood all the way to adulthood. And so for me, I was able to recognize in my own life that my very first addiction in my life, or addiction slash disease, was uh, restrictive avoidance disorder with food at 5 years old because I had celiac disease. And so my eating disorder started first. My codependency started second. My cigarettes started third. My drugs started fourth, and then alcohol and sexual addictions kind of came into that place. So in that chronological order is how I got clean and sober. So, got clean and sober with celibacy and getting off of alcohol, getting off of drugs, then getting off of cigarettes, then going into codependency treatment, and then finally going into treatment for eating disorders. And they say that, the longer you've had it is the harder it is to heal. And so I asked you that question because with your background, growing up in a family of lots of transition and lots of moves and abandonment and loss. Generally, in a family like that, there's lots of codependency. And so I would assume that codependency ran rampant in the family of origin that led up to the drugs and alcohol, that led up to the relationship that you had.
Right. So there was a very interesting dynamic in the family in that the marriage wasn't great, but we always said the family was, right? So we all enjoyed one another's company when the children were young. And we did have a good family. I think there was always some strife in the marriage, but we did a lot of great things as a family. The codependency was so, what's the word? It's either insidious or subtle or something that we really didn't pick up on it. And it wasn't until my mom's younger sister passed of a brain aneurysm that she identified that she needed to be in recovery as an adult child of an alcoholic.
Yeah. Yeah. And so,
Why that actually brought it to bear, I'm not sure. But
mhm.
at that point, codependency became something we spoke about as a family. That because she had been raised in codependency, she raised us in codependency, but none of that terminology was there. Right. So you looked
Mhm.
at the family, and yes, they were divorced, and yes, we moved a lot. But otherwise, we had a pretty functional family. Neither of my parents were addicts or alcoholics, and they were both very successful people in the long run. Their marriage wasn't successful. They got married when they were very young, and she was pregnant. So that was an interesting, yes, a lot of unearthing and discovering. And what I actually discovered after 2 years of therapy was that I had been molested as a child.
Mhm.
So I take it back to that
Mhm.
feeling of not being worthy of being protected. So I made that story up as a 3, 4, 5 year old. I don't really know when it happened. I don't really know how long it happened, but I know at 6 when we moved away and I had a great year of a wonderful experience of life, topped off with this riding this horse, that horses saved my emotional life.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
they saved my emotional life on more than one occasion. They're wonderful spiritual animals that are they just embody so much, right? Of forgiveness and patience and being willing just to let a person sit on them where they would normally be attacked by a predator and allow them to tell them where they should go, at what rate, and how. And that's just an amazing overcoming of their instinctual being, right?
Yeah, they're
So
very
there's
intuitive. They're very,
that's
very intuitive animals. And it's amazing that you share that because, going from that 3-year-old little girl who's molested and probably is gone into a disassociated state as a little child, and then you're introduced
absolutely
you're introduced to these amazing animals that are very intuitive and very knowledgeable of trauma at 6 years old, 7 years old. You're introduced to these animals, and it's almost like God brought them into being for you to have deliverance
absolutely.
of that disassociated little girl's trauma. And Danielle, back in the 80s, I had the privilege of going to the very first ever. Your mother would love this. Is your mother still alive or is she passed?
She is.
She would love this story. I was able to go to the very first ever adult children of alcoholic conference in Nashville, Tennessee. And back then, the who's who in recovery was Judy Hollis in eating disorders, Claudia Black for adult children of alcoholics, who wrote the book It Will Never Happen to
Mhm,
Me, John Bradshaw, Patrick Carnes for sexual addiction, um,
mhm.
and then, of course, Virginia Satir and Sharon Wegscheider Cruz for codependency. And it was the most amazing thing that I got to sit under the umbrella of those forefathers of recovery. And Virginia Satir and Sharon Wegscheider Cruz were the first ever to develop or design the protocol of recovery of the um, the family sculpt of the responsible child, the lost child, the scapegoat, and the mascot clown. And they did a drama scene showing and describing that so the audience could see it. And anyway, I bring that up because, and I don't know what happened to my little cassette player, but I remember that conference. They recorded the whole conference with little cassettes. And
Right?
and this is in 19, like in the 80s, early 80s. And I remember this like it happened yesterday. The best talk they had was called Codependency in the Looking Good Family. So I love you describing your family as being happy and joyous and nobody recognized in codependency,
Right?
because codependency, in my definition, is when we allow people, places, or things to become more important than ourselves, that we lose our identity. And so codependency in the Looking Good Family is very cunning because it looks good, the family looks happy, the children seem well and
Mhm.
secure, but nobody in the family knows that this little girl Danielle got molested at 3 years old. And so it looks good, it smells good,
Right.
but nobody sees it. And again, it takes us back to biblical principles that the Lord and God, in the spoken word of God, talks about, that there'll be 4 generations of sin from our forefathers, and how important it is for all of us to do that genealogical or the ancestral lineage of healing. And what a better way to do it, like you said, than with horses who are very intuitive, and they know. I mean, I just got back. I went to a my first retreat of 2020 was at the Cottonwood Resort in outside of Billings, Montana, at a horse farm, and we went there for the habit finder, looking at our habits. And the owner was able to work with us with leadership skills with the horses. And within 24 hours of
Mhm.
arriving, I got that dreaded phone call that my father was in the hospital and not doing well. So I remember going up to the one horse that was still in its stable. We had done stuff with it in the arena, and going up and talking to her and saying, "My dad's in the hospital and I think he's going to die." And I just started crying. And the horse king that I was talking to did not like people coming up to him in his stable. And I was like right there up to him. And so he'd pull way back in his stable. And then he'd come up again and he'd nudge his head like this against me. And I'd cry. And when I cried enough, then he'd pull way back again. And then he kept coming up and he nudged his head. And then as soon as I walked away, he'd go, "Yay!" Like come back again. And it was just, and it was like
Aw.
he gave me permission to grieve. He gave me that permission while I was there to grieve. So anyway, so going more into your story here, Danielle. So you then have this passion and your love for horses, and you now finally break free of this abusive relationship and get clean and sober. So take us now next to the next journey of your life of recovery and wholeness and breaking free.
Okay, so I'm 30 years old and I'm relocated once again. I had been in Kentucky for a good long time, longer than I'd lived anywhere in my life, right? And I loved Kentucky. I really wasn't fond of leaving. So here I am in Michigan, and I know that I'm the most important job now, right? So I would carry around my recovery books with me. I lived in an abuse shelter so that I could be on my own, and then my mom really wasn't bailing me out, and got a place with a roommate and she didn't pay the rent. So in my recovery, for the first time in my life, I got evicted. And it continued like that for, the better part of the first 2 years. It was just one thing after another, one challenge after another. And it took a long time for me to really get my feet underneath me. I took a part-time job as a cashier. Oddly enough, I have a part-time job as a cashier now too. But from there, I got a job at the university working part-time, and went down to part-time at that job. And then I got another part-time job at the university. So now I'm making a living wage, which is good. And then I can start to rebuild my farrier clientele. So this year I am retiring from being a farrier, and I've been a farrier now for 36 years with that little interruption in the middle there. And
Could
that's
you
what it,
for the audience sake, would you explain, because I've not heard that term. What does a farrier mean? What is a
a
farrier?
farrier is similar to a blacksmith. I
Okay.
think most people know what a blacksmith is,
Hmm.
but all blacksmiths pretty much can shoe horses, and farriers just shoe horses. And they don't necessarily do blacksmithing work, which is shaping iron.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I learned both. I
Okay.
learned some iron working and I learned some horseshoeing, and I learned it through an apprenticeship. So the 6 years from the time that I graduated college at the University of Kentucky until I moved away from Kentucky, I did that. I learned to be a horseshoer. I learned to do some iron work, and I picked up clients. And then I worked with a partner for 3 years. So I actually got proficient at what I was doing. And then I did my own thing on the personal side and ended up blowing the engine in my truck and moving to Michigan and starting from scratch. So now I have to buy a truck and I have to be able to pay my payments, and then I can start building up my shoeing clientele. So I did that, and I probably went back to full-time shoeing when my second child was born. After I'd been clean for about 2 years, I met my husband to be, and we were engaged for, I want to say, a year. We dated for a year and we were engaged for a little less than a year. So we got engaged in July and got married in May, and my son was born in February. Oh, oops. He wanted to change the date and so that he would be born into wedlock. And I'm like, look, I have a sister in California, a sister in Philadelphia. My dad's in upstate New York, and I'm not changing the date.
Mm.
And he went to his mom and he was like, oh, we're going to have a child before the wedding. And she's like, it's fine. It's the 90s, honey. You're going to be okay. So we did get married. I went from single to mother of 3. And then 2 years later, I had another child. And it was after that child was born that I went back to full-time horseshoeing. And it served me very well because it was a very flexible schedule. I was my own boss. When my kids were sick, that my clients would understand. I took on very small stables. I didn't do any large stables of horses for that very reason, because they were flexible with me. I was flexible with them. It worked well. It was something that I loved doing it. It's very physically demanding work, but I've always enjoyed being physically strong and capable of doing that sort of thing. And I loved being in service to the horses, and especially the backyard horse owner who often has a difficult time keeping a farrier.
So with that story, share with us, tell the audience, what is a horse whisperer, so they know what a horse whisperer is, because it says you're a horse whisperer. And what is that exactly?
So I would say around 2000, I met Stan Allen at a horse whispering clinic. And Stan Allen is a 4th generation horse whisperer from Utah. And I tell you, Jill, when I came home from that clinic, I was a wreck because I felt like everything that I had learned about horses up until that point needed to be unlearned.
Mm-hmm.
And it just totally flipped upside down my paradigm. It was a paradigm shift of how to relate to a horse at that point in my life. And the best way to explain horse whispering is to say that it is a method to help the horse learn to deal with its domestication and understand that it has a choice to either stay in fight and flight or to submit to domestication and learn to take direction from humans. But it takes a special human to be able to make that transition successful for both.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the horse whisperer.
Well, because a horse is really created to be in the wild. And
Absolutely.
So when all of a sudden that horse is now put into a new paradigm, like you said, of being domesticated, it's do they call horses, and maybe I have the wrong word, like predators? Because a horse isn't when you're in the wild, is that a predator type of an animal? A
horse is a prey animal.
Or prey, yeah, prey. Yeah.
Yes.
And so for you to take a horse out of the wild, which they're customized to or accustomed to being prey, and now bring it into a stable in a locked environment, it's a whole new training of that horse, right? To be able to coexist.
Absolutely. Their instincts just don't serve them the same way that they would in their natural situation. So that's sort of where I've ended up, right? I have gone from being served by the horse to serving the horse to learning the actual techniques to be able to help the horse adjust to its unnatural situation. And the man that taught me, Dr. Stan Allen, said that we actually have a responsibility to the horse. If we're going to take them out of their natural situation and put them in this domesticated situation, we have a responsibility to help them learn how to deal with it in a way that's peaceful and productive for everyone. And I'm going to suggest at this point in my life, I'm going to take those horse whispering principles and start human whispering.
Yeah.
Because we have that same choice, not to live in constant anxiety and fear and worry, and to take guidance from the Holy Spirit and assurance from the Holy Spirit that we really are loved, that we really are provided for and taken care of and always will be. But we have to make that choice.
Well, and it's like, and I agree with you. It's like you bring that horse in to that arena, or the stable, and as a human, we bring that in, like expecting that horse, like you say, to be domesticated. And then in one breath, we say, "Oh, I love horses. I love horses." But if we say that the same way as we might say, "Oh, I love God. I love God." But we don't take the time to love that horse and be in a relationship. Or we say, "Oh, I love my husband," or "I love my kids." But we don't take the time to be in relationship with our family or our God or whatever. It's really a lie. We're living a lie of words coming out of our mouth, but the actions don't follow suit. So I think by being this horse whisperer, of you being able to slow it down, take that horse, and the love you had in your heart, now exhibit that love to that horse in action versus words, is profound. And the same takes into fruition how we can be in relationship with God and others. Is that what you're saying, Danielle? Similar?
Absolutely. They're basically, yes. The premise that I'm coming from in human whispering is that we are spiritual beings on a human journey.
Mhm.
Therefore, as spiritual beings on a human journey, we need a leader, and it needs to be the Holy Spirit.
Mhm.
So, is it significantly different than taking a horse from its natural situation into a domesticated situation and asking it to take like guidance from us?
Mhm.
There's a lot of parallels, and a lot of people have reached this, but they've reached it in a different way where they're going to continue to use the horse. And I will use the horse, certainly, but I don't necessarily have to have a horse there to teach the principles to humans, right?
Mhm.
So
So take us
it's a
to.
very exciting time in my life.
It sounds exciting.
This is, and the interesting thing is, when you brought up your father's passing, it was my father's passing 3 years ago that kind of kicked me in the butt and said, "You're not going to live forever. You better figure out what you actually want to do with your life." And it was the first time in my life that I felt called to speak and to tell my story and to teach peace. I'm like, okay, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I'm going to start. So I'm really, really excited about this project that we're on together, and being able to meet and interact with all these people and make all these connections. And thank you so much for connecting with me on this podcast and providing the connections for all of us to hear a little bit about one another before we get there.
Yeah, and so the audience knows what we're even referring to is this lovely lady, Elizabeth Clamon, she's an author and a speaker, and she does collaborative books with writers, and I mean with people that want to share their story. And so both Danielle and I are in her upcoming book, which is called Fiercely Faithful, and it's going to be released on Amazon in December for $1 as an ebook, and then it'll be as a hardcover book in January. And so, what we've decided, all of us authors in the book, is that we'd love to be able to meet you all personally and connect with you as well, because our story can be your story can be our story, because we all share. I mean, Danielle, and this is the first time we've really talked, and neither one of us knew how much we had in common with horses and crack cocaine addiction and molestation, all of that. And so, when you are in community and sharing story, you really realize how much alike we all are. And so we want you all to be invited, personal invitation to come to Branson, Missouri, February 5th through 7th for an amazing conference at King's Castle. And the castle holds 1,600 people, and we're only going to take up to 500 people so that we can have every other row in social distance. So no fear on attending. In fact, I went to Danielle to King's Castle last night to see Christmas Wonderland. It was amazing. And
Mm.
it was wonderful to see like every other row. And, you know, the party you're with, they still do like 4 seats apart, and everyone was there. And it was beautiful. It was a nice show. Everyone enjoyed themselves. So, this castle, this palace, this theater is just amazing. So we're having it there, and everyone is invited. And my website, which is braveheartworkshops.com, is where you can register and join us. So what I'd like to do at this point is show you. And then hopefully you can join us in Branson. And registration is open now. And for groups, if there's people listening and you have a group of 12 or more, the wonderful thing is you can buy group tickets together, and then your group leader gets a complimentary ticket for every 12 tickets sold. So please go online and join us and connect. We're going to do amazing praise and worship. We were able to hire some of the singers from the theater that will be leading us in praise and worship. And we'll be doing communion on Sunday. So it'll be an unbelievable, healing, Christ centered weekend. And even if you're not a Christian, please join us because we love you wherever you're at. And your story is our story. So it will be so wonderful to connect the dots with all of you. And so, with that, Danielle, I just appreciate your vulnerability. I know you didn't know what kind of questions I would ask you. And so, I love your transparency and your willingness to share your private moments with us.
And I love the synchronicities. That was a great time. Thank you so much. And I do want to add that they can find me on Facebook. I have a personal or a business page called Pursuing Personal Peace with Danielle McMahon.
That's awesome. And I will be posting this video on my timeline and also on Danielle's. And so we'll have that link on there for you and on the YouTube channel as well. So, also, before we close, I'd just like the audience to know the Connection Show also has the Connection Zoom Gathering Tribe. And we meet every Wednesday evening. And the beauty of the Connection Show Gathering Tribe is the ability for you to jump on at any given time. Once in a while, our podcast leaders might be on that show where you can connect with them and get to know them better. This past week, we did some of this ancestral legacy burden work with a renowned therapist out of Nashville, Tennessee, and he's going to join us in 2 more weeks. And continue on helping people to understand legacy burdens. It's an amazing time to come on. It's free. And you can find that link to join us on my website as well. So, Danielle, if a Wednesday night, if you're ever home in time, East Coast time, we meet at 8 p.m. till 9:30. So we'd love to have you. And we look forward to seeing you again on the Connection Zoom Gathering Tribe Show. Have a wonderful day, Danielle, and I'll look forward to seeing you in Branson in February.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Jill.
Bye bye now, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the Connection Show. Let's connect now. We can dream together to renew, restore, and reconnect with wellness in our life and community. To enhance connection, join us in the Zoom Connection Gathering Tribe on Wednesday evenings. The Zoom Connection Gathering Tribe is an easy and practical way for everyone to meet up, gather, and feel welcomed and accepted. To join us, go to braveheartworkshops.com. Then click on the podcast tab and the Zoom Connection Tribe tab. On that page, go to the Facebook page called the Connection Show Gathering Tribe and register to join our Facebook group. We post secure passwords each week in the group so you can log in safely. We meet on Wednesday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 o'clock Central, 6 o'clock Mountain, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for 1.5 hours with great topics, laughter, and connection. See you on Wednesday evenings. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.